Welcome to Viewpoint on ILTV, where we bring you leading voices from the Middle East and beyond. In this special, we're taking you inside the Israel-Gaza war and global anti-Semitism from here to hear from thought leaders and cultural critics shaping today's discourse. I'm Emily Schrader, and today we're speaking with Dr. Gad Saad. Dr. Saad is an evolutionary behavioral scientist and a visiting professor and global ambassador at Northwood University. He's also the best-selling author of The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense, one of my personal favorite books, and has recently actually been released in Hebrew here in Israel. Now, Dr. Saad is known for his fearless critiques of political correctness, of radical Islam, and Western appeasement culture. He's also been a powerful advocate for free speech and a staunch defender of Israel and Jewish identity within the Western world. He also hosts the popular podcast, The Saad Truth, and has become a major voice challenging the rise of ideological conformity in academia and beyond. Dr. Saad, thank you so much for joining us today. Just to start, now, you've built a career calling out dangerous ideologies from radical Islam to identity politics. What was your breaking point? I mean, when did you decide enough is enough and that you had to speak out about this more publicly?
You know, well, first, thank you for having me. It's been really an ongoing opening up of my eyes, so to speak, from when I first became a professor. So my original work in academia was to try to incorporate evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology to study human behavior. And I was shocked to see that many of my colleagues who were social scientists, business school professors, were dead set against the idea that biology matters to human beings. And I thought, how could it be that otherwise intelligent, educated people so parasitized by these kinds of imbecilic thought processes? So it really started probably around 1994, but it has been growing like a tsunami ever since. And so it's been an ongoing journey.
Now, let's talk a little bit about October 7th itself. As someone who fled Lebanon as a child, due at least in part to anti-Semitism and, of course, war, how did this massacre committed by Hamas, how did it resonate with you personally? And honestly, what does it say about the world's reaction that sympathy so quickly shifted away from Israel, who was the victim after October 7th?
Well, of course, I was horrified by the October 7th event, although perhaps not surprised given the personal history that I have in the Middle East. But you're exactly right that what has been, as disconcerting as the original event is exactly what you said, which is you would think that such a tragic event would unify the world against barbarism. This is where the Jews could finally garner some empathy, sympathy, and compassion. But of course, to our dismay, we found out after October 7th, people were already starting to demonstrate against the evil Jews and the evil Israelis. It's horrible, but I hate to say it, it doesn't surprise me given my personal history.
Now, you've spoken a lot about your family's escape from Lebanon, so I do have to ask, when you saw Israel's pager operation taking out Hezbollah's top commanders in Lebanon with a single, not even a strike, with miniature explosions, did you shed a tear of joy, pour a glass of Lebanese arak, or both?
A bit of both, of course. The Israeli ingenuity never ceases to impress me and amaze me. Although I must say, if you remember, I think it was 2010, there was an attack of sharks in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt that was blamed on the Israelis. So I worried that this pager attack will lead to a whole bunch of new conspiratorial theories against the evil Israelis. So brace yourself, the conspiracies are coming.
Well, we've heard the Zionist squirrels from Iran, the Zionist falcons from Turkey, the Zionist sharks from Egypt. I mean, we've been very, very busy when it comes to these Zionist spy animals. So we had to upgrade to the pagers. But back to Lebanon, I mean, we see that the Islamic Republic of Iran, they've been sort of an occupier of Lebanon. They've really destabilized the country, caused so much suffering through their proxy Hezbollah, and they've destabilized so much in the entire region. Why is it so difficult for those in the West to accept that this is the reality in the Middle East, or accept that sometimes force is needed in order to stop these jihadist organizations?
Because it's a combination of exactly the parasitic mind, which, parasitic ideas destroy our ability to think properly. My next book, Suicidal Empathy, completes the story by then arguing what happens when your emotional system is parasitized. So if I can zombify your ability to think and your ability to feel, then I have completely captured you. And so what happens in this case, to your question, the noble Muslims are always the peaceful victims, even though in every country that Islam leads, the religious minorities end up suffering. But according to our Western, bien-pensants, as we say in French, the politically correct thinkers, it is always the nasty colonizing Jews that are the mean ones. And so it simply can't be inherently that beautiful, peaceful Muslim people could ever cause instability. And that's what is being taught in universities. And so it doesn't surprise me that people are unable to understand the reality of the geopolitics of the region.
Well, we'll get to suicidal empathy in a bit, but I do want to talk first about the parasitic mind. I mean, in the book, you warn that Western civilization is essentially on life support. Would you say that the Hamas support that we've seen in the streets of the West is a symptom of this sort of late-stage cultural collapse? And if so, is there a cure for these parasitic ideas that have taken root?
Of course, what we're seeing in terms of the pro-Hamas stuff is a manifestation of parasitized thinking. Look, I think that there is a cure, but the problem is that for me to be able to administer a vaccine to you, you have to be willing to come to the station and receive the vaccine. And so what ends up often happening is that people go, la, 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 I don't want to hear it. And so my attempts to try to shift you from your anchored positions fall on deaf ears, literally. So in the abstract, I think that there is a way to alter people's thinking, but it's really, really a difficult thing. I mean, about a year ago, I was invited on a show hosted by a British psychiatrist, and at the end of the show, he asked me, in your 30-plus years as a professor, what has been the thing that has most surprised you about human nature? And so I paused for a second, and I said, probably the inability to get someone to change their opinion once it is deeply anchored. And so while on the one hand, I wake up every morning hopeful that I can change people's opinions, on the other hand, I realize that it's a Herculean task.
Now, you are living in Canada, where we've seen enormous pro-Hamas demonstrations. We've seen an influx of IRGC terrorists. We've seen many cowardly responses from the government, the Trudeau government before. Is Canada uniquely weak when it comes to confronting this radicalism?
It is uniquely weak in that, on the woke meter, it scores very, very highly. Some of the other ones perhaps might be Sweden, one could have argued was, pretty high on the woke meter. But Justin Trudeau, who's no longer prime minister, but was for 9 years, is a walking manifestation of every parasitic idea that I discuss in the parasitic mind, right? He's a postmodernist, he's a proud feminist, he's a cultural relativist. So, for example, Justin Trudeau, when the previous Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, had said that in Canada, we will not tolerate barbaric acts like child brides and honor killings and female genital mutilation, Justin Trudeau, who was then just a member of parliament, wasn't angry by the barbaric acts. He was angry that you would call them barbaric acts, which is exactly what cultural relativism is. So there is a unique feature about the Canadian ethos that makes us more likely to succumb to many of these parasitic ideas. Unfortunately, yes.
Well, you've often referred to universities as breeding grounds for lunacy. I don't think that's any more apparent than today. Why have a lot of these Western academic institutions, once devoted to learning, to reason, why have they become echo chambers for anti-Westernism, to this victimhood ideology, the woke ideology? And is there any way to bring sanity back to campuses specifically? I mean, you mentioned how in order to get the vaccine, you have to be willing to come to the clinic. Can we do that with universities?
I mean, I certainly hope so. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a point for me to get out of bed. But I do think that it's going to be a long battle. And so many people write to me and say, hey, Professor Saad, now that Donald Trump is in power, are we going to be done with all of this craziness? And I say, absolutely not. It's wonderful that he came to power and that the alternative would have only worsened the reality. But it took 50 to 100 years, to your question, it took about 50 to 100 years for many of these parasitic ideas to be spawned on university campuses and then to eventually become our prime ministers and our leaders and so on. So it's not going to be a magical vaccine where in 4 years that Donald Trump is in power, we're suddenly going to have everything eradicated. So it's going to be a long battle. I do think that we can, regain sanity, but please don't be complacent. It doesn't all begin and end with Donald Trump.
Now, speaking of the universities, I have to ask, have you personally faced pushback from within academia for challenging this sort of ideological orthodoxy that we see on campus? I mean, even as a student, I got some grief for pushing back, so I can only imagine what you've gone through as an actual professor on some of these campuses. I mean, you were at Concordia. This was one of the worst when it comes to this support of jihadism. I was there just a few months ago. Absolute chaos. What's your experience been?
Oh, it hasn't been easy. I mean, thank God that I've got a thick skin and thank God that I'm a combative guy, because otherwise I think I would have wilted decades ago. Look, one of the reasons, the main reason why I'm currently a visiting professor in Michigan is precisely to your point. It was becoming just impossible to be a high-profile Jewish professor at Concordia. Concordia has been referred to colloquially as Gaza University well before October 7th. I mean, decades before. Benjamin Netanyahu was deplatformed in 2002. So this is now 23 years ago. So the dynamics that we're seeing on university campuses, or that people are waking up to today, have been festering for decades. So it's not been easy, but I persist, I persevere, and eventually truth and decency will win.
Well, let's hope so. Certainly with these funding cuts, they're going a little bit closer in the right direction. And speaking of all of this chaos on campus, I mean, you've been a very fierce defender for many years of truth, of free speech. But this is the same defense that we're seeing some use to defend support for jihadist terrorism on campus. I mean, I'll leave Israel out of the equation. It's actually support for terrorism. Mahmoud Khalil, of course, being a great example. How do you respond to those defending these Hamas supporters on campus with the free speech arguments?
Well, the academic leftists have never found a nasty person that they weren't willing to put all of their empathy and love towards, right? It could have been Mao Zedong, it could have been the Cambodian Khmer Rouge, it could have been anybody, right? I mean, the more they hate the West, the more they're going to support them. Look, I am a free speech absolutist, and I'm right now appearing on Israeli TV, so hopefully this doesn't shock people what I'm about to say. Someone with my background and with my fierce defense of the Jewish people and Israel and so on still defends the right of Holocaust deniers to spew their nonsense. So in that sense, I'm a free speech absolutist, but that doesn't mean that you're allowed to incite direct violence against Jews, right? You could say Judaism is horrible. You could say the Holocaust never happened. You couldn't say anything more offensive and insulting than that. But in a free society, you have to tolerate the idiots and the racists and the anti-Semites. But what many of those jihadi guys do goes well beyond free speech absolutism, right? When you are imploring intifada and global jihad and free Palestine, you are inciting direct violence. So this is probably where I would draw the line. Yes, hate the Jews if you want, but that doesn't give you the right to call for their extermination.
Well, I think even further than calling, and at least in some of these cases, like with Khalil, it wasn't really about what he said, it's about what he did. It's that they actually held these protests, that they took over buildings. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous, and at least in my view, to say that this is a free speech issue, even if one is a free speech absolutist like you're mentioning. I want to talk a little bit about the idea of this woke ideology that we're hearing so much about on campus. And I want to ask you your opinion. Why is there this connection between this sort of progressive cult of the woke ideology that's taken root in these campuses and anti-Semitism and totalitarian ideologies?
Well, I alluded to this in, I think, my previous answer. The left despises the West. Islam despises the West. They each, for different reasons, wish to bring down the current system. And so let's lay in bed together for a while, and then later we will decide who ends up winning. And so this is the really orgiastically evil union of two groups that are equally committed to the destruction of the West. By the way, in my latest book, my previous book on happiness, I talk about political orientation and happiness. And I argue that one of the reasons why research consistently finds that conservatives are happier than the progressives. Progressives wake up every day with the idea that the current system that they live under is transphobic, Islamophobic, hateful, it's the patriarchy. So just around the corner, there's going to be unicornia. And so if we, dismantle the current system, finally, inshallah, we could have peace and love. Well, Islam also believes that. That's why when Islam goes to a new land, it destroys all of the lyrics of the previous society, right? All the artifacts, the Buddhist statues. And so in that sense, both of these ideologies share their common animus towards the West.
Now, I said I would talk about suicidal empathy, so I'm going to ask you, can you just explain a little bit about what this is and maybe even give a couple of examples of how prevalent it's become, especially in the aftermath of October 7th, just in recent months?
Right. So let me first begin with an analogy. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a psychiatric disorder, but that is rooted in an otherwise evolutionary beneficial process. So the idea that I should scan the environment for threats, if I meet you and you sneeze in your hand and then you shake my hand, I might quietly go to the bathroom to wash my hands because I don't want to catch your cold. That makes perfect evolutionary sense. If I now spend 8 hours in the bathroom cleaning my hands until my skin starts falling off, that becomes a manifestation of germ contamination OCD. So what started as an adaptive process becomes maladaptive when it misfires. And so I use this exact idea to argue that, of course, empathy is a beautiful and noble emotion. Empathy is necessary for a social species like Homo sapiens, so that's fine. The problem is when empathy misfires, when it becomes hyperactive, when it targets the wrong targets of empathy. No, I shouldn't have more empathy for MS-13 gang members coming in from El Salvador illegally than I should have for American vets who lost their legs fighting for my country, right? In a dream world, I should provide empathy to everyone, but we exist in the real world where there are trade-offs, and therefore it makes sense that my emotional system would be strategic in how it mets out empathy. If there are two children that are about to be hit by a bus, no one would say that I'm evil if I were to worry more about my biological child than the random child. I would love to save both of them, but if given a choice, I'm likely to choose my biological child. That doesn't make me evil, it makes me a Darwinian being. And so the entire book looks at that misfiring of empathy, and then it argues that many of our domestic policies and foreign policies arise as a result of this misguided, misplaced empathy.
Now, I want to ask you something a little bit different about Israeli society. You mentioned your earlier book about happiness. Israel consistently ranks as one of the happiest countries in the world. And this is, of course, despite the fact that we have endless terrorism, that we've been fighting for our existence for 74, 75 plus years. And even before that, fighting to return to our homeland here in the land of Israel. How do you explain that a country that's under so much attacks constantly, both diplomatically, physically, mentally, in every single way, how do we still have such a happy society? And what's your advice going forward in the post-October 7th reality that's become such a challenge for the Israeli society?
So I think one of the reasons why Israel, I mean, not Israeli academics, I think they are just as prone to be parasitized as other academics, but the reason why the larger Israeli society seems to be a bit more inoculated, if not a lot more inoculated to these parasitic ideas, is because you can't afford the luxury to succumb to, suicidal empathy and parasitic thinking when you are in such a dangerous and nasty neighborhood. It kind of distills your focus to focus on the really important things. And so I think by that same mechanism, because Israelis are facing existential threats every day coming at you from every corner, when I now go to the beach in Kikar Atarim, I might actually enjoy that time there because I realize what's awaiting. It really causes me to have this existential gratitude. So I suspect that that might be one of the reasons why Israelis are so happy. They wake up every day, I'm still alive, thank God. Also, it helps that Israelis are gorgeous people. The times that I have visited Israel, when I see the mix of the races between the Mizrahi Jew and the Ethiopian Falasha girl and this, how could you not be happy looking at all of these beautiful people?
It's true. Israel does have a very good-looking population overall. That's absolutely true. It's interesting to see the comparison when you look at the norm for happiness or lack thereof in many other Arab countries. I mean, we see a lot of the opposite, even sometimes in very wealthy Arab countries. Aside from war, what is your take on this? Would you tie that back to what you mentioned before about this ideology where, you know, there's always something better, that you can't really live in the moment and appreciate what you have?
Well, and the fact that if you don't have the most basic freedom, so in many Islamic countries, you know, the most basic sexual impulses that people have are difficult to ever explore because you have such segregated societies. You can't, you know, even look at a woman, talk to a woman. And so anything, any ideology that reduces my personal freedom, my personal dignity, my personal agency, it doesn't take a fancy professor to tell you that it's probably not going to lead to downstream happiness. And so if there is a way for us to free the region from all of these ideological shackles, the potential, the human potential in the Middle East is truly infinite. So I'm hopefully optimistic.
I want to ask you about what you referred to a little bit before, and that is the concept of luxury beliefs that we don't have in Israeli society here, but we see so prevalently on campuses in particular. We're at a very interesting time when the threats that face Israel, in fact, do threaten the United States and some of the most powerful, well-armed countries in the world, specifically with the Islamic regime in Iran. And I'm wondering what your advice would be to speaking to students or community members in the Western world who don't realize that that is a luxury belief they have, that those things aren't going to affect them. How do you show people that this actually is an urgent issue?
It's one of the great challenges because regrettably, the architecture of the human mind prefers to ignore problems until it really, forgive me for saying, bites you in the ass, right? So there is no diabetes until I get diabetes. Until then, it's just some abstract disease that's over there. Other people get it, but I don't get it. Because, look, life is scary, and so it's better to just put your head in the sand, as I explained in the parasitic mind. I call it ostrich parasitic syndrome, right?
The ostrich brigade.
The ostrich brigade, thank you. And so it's very, very hard to get people to pay attention, even if the problem is only next street, but it's not on this street. So I think we'll be okay. This is why I do what I do. This is why I write the books that I do. This is why I accept lovely invitations like yours, because I hold out hope that by consistently speaking, I can get people to pay attention before it actually does bite them in the rear end.
All right, and just for fun, as a last question, if you had to choose one idea pathogen to exile to a remote island where it could do no harm, what would it be? And you could only choose one. I think I know what you're going to choose just based on your earlier answers. Would it be postmodernism, DEI and all its associated bureaucracy, or Justin Trudeau?
Well, I don't know what your answer would be, but if I answer seriously, it would actually be postmodernism, because postmodernism, I refer to it as the granddaddy of all parasitic ideas, because it is the framework that allows all of the other parasitic ideas to flourish, because it purports that there are no objective truths other than the one objective truth that there are no objective truths. That's what then allows people to say men are women, up is down, Jews are evil, left is right, slavery is freedom. And so it is that nihilistic intellectual terrorism framework of postmodernism that leads to all the others. So let's exile that to the island to never be seen again.
All right. I was going to guess Justin Trudeau because it incorporates everything. But, you know, I'll let you you made a good case for postmodernism. All right. Well, we are unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to encourage all of our viewers to go out and purchase actually all of your books. Everything I've read are fantastic. Follow him on social media, everything. And of course, if you're here in Israel, you can now buy The Parasitic Mind in Hebrew as well. It is available here in Israel. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Gad Saad.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Cheers.